Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the October Town Hall for IGSHPA. Great to see a bunch of familiar and new faces to me. Looking forward to hear this presentation. Jeff, if you want to get started on the slide, we'll just go through a few IGSHPA updates. As I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about already, we have a conference coming up in Las Vegas, and we couldn't be more excited about it. We have an incredible lineup of speakers. If you go over to the IGSHPA website, you'll be able to look at all the conference proceedings that you'd like to see, the agenda or sponsors or anything else. All that information is located at IGSHPA.org. So we have an amazing new announcement. We just got our diamond sponsor, which is actually the Department of Energy, and we couldn't be more grateful for their support. I want to thank all of our sponsors for their continued support of our organization, and we look forward to highlighting them a bit at the conference. If you have any questions about sponsorship or anything else, again, you can find the conference sponsorship information on our website. So we do have a wonderful little location for all of the IGSHPA booths on the floor. We have a great location this year right at the entrance to the National Groundwater floor. We do have one booth left. We do have some options for additional booth spaces, but we are always looking for more exhibitors. If you'd like to see who's exhibiting already, you can head over to our website and take a look. Just as a reminder, if you'd like CEUs for this presentation today, please make a comment right at the IGSHPA account for Zoom and add your name and email address, and we'll make sure to record those for you. We are no longer waiving CEUs for any 2022 renewals. So if you are renewing at the end of this year or even next year, please make sure to let us know that you'd like us to record your renewals for your renewal or your CEUs for your renewal. Just a few housekeeping. I'm sure most of you have already attended town halls before, but any questions that you have for the speakers, we do ask that you put them in the chat function to Zoom, and I, as a moderator, will ask Jeff those questions at the end of his presentation. Please make sure that your microphone is muted during the presentation, and then the recording of this session will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later. Just a little bit new to the town halls, but a great opportunity to just clarify disclaimer and potential conflict of interest. The upcoming presentation represents the opinion of the presenter and does not represent any official position, opinion, or endorsement of any products or services by IGSHPA or its members. IGSHPA town halls and dig deeper webinars are for member updates and education of the latest information in the geothermal heat pump industry and are not meant to endorse one technology brand over another. It is the presenter's responsibility to disclose any conflict of interest or position that may arise in the content of the webinar. So with all of the details out of the way, I will introduce a man that probably doesn't need much introduction. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Jeff Hammong. Jeff is the Executive Director at the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association, a nonprofit member-driven organization established in 1987 to advance ground source heat pump technology on local, state and provincial, national, and international levels. Jeff earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and an electrical engineering degree from Purdue, and has 36 years of experience in the ground source heat pump industry, including positions at Climate Master, Enertech, GeoFlow, and Water Harness. Jeff is a member of ASHRAE, AEE, ASAE, and has served on the CSA, HRAI, and IGSHPA technical and advisory committees. He is chair for the next edition of the ANSI CSA IGSHPA C448 ground source heat pump standard. So with that, I will let Jeff take over.
Thank you so much, Courtney. We'll try to steer clear of as many acronyms as we can, but that seems to be our way of the world in this industry for sure. So I appreciate everybody's time this morning. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I think that having consistency in our industry in the way of standards is super important as we grow. And so, I'm volunteering to serve as chair of the next edition of C448 for that reason. I think it just really helps solidify all of us in the industry if CSA and IGSHPA and all the other organizations that are promoting geothermal are able to come up with consensus and standards that work for everyone. It just really helps us move forward in growing our industry the right way. So I thought I'd give a quick update on where we are with the next edition. We have a current edition. It's 2016. It was revised in 2017 to include the IGSHPA recognition. Oops, sorry. Right here at the bottom of the page. So you can see that is the current edition of the Bi-National Standard. It's Canada and the US, and that was the most recent update. We'll talk today about why this is such an important standard, in particular C448, a little bit of history on C448, because a lot of Americans in particular are not familiar with this standard, although it's been around in Canada for quite some time. I want to talk about the importance of the standard and how it affects stakeholders, and then some timelines for the 2023 edition. This edition has been in progress for quite some time. We had some setbacks with COVID and funding and all that kind of thing. So we're finally going to get this thing out here next year. And then we'll have some time at the end for any Q&A. To kind of partner on Courtney's disclaimer, this is the disclaimer on behalf of CSA. So anything that I mention in this discussion is not the opinion or position of CSA Group. We're all volunteers. Myself, Mark Metzner, the vice chair, and all the subcommittee chairs and members are unpaid volunteers. So these are my opinions and my updates as I see them. I'm sure they're not far off from CSA's position, but I'm not speaking for CSA. If you haven't heard of CSA, it's a nonprofit group for standards, certification, testing, product verification, and it's an SDO, Standards Development Organization. It's non-governmental. The approach for creating standards is consensus-based, which I thoroughly enjoy. We have some lively meetings on occasion, but at the end, we come up with consensus that everybody is okay with, so that the standard meets everybody's requirements, or at least we have some compromise to get there. CSA is cooperating with ANSI and IGSHPA in both the 2016 edition and this new edition. And funding is based upon what stakeholders are able to provide to CSA. Last time around, CSA provided a lot of that funding. This time around, we were fortunate to have some stakeholders to help us further these updates. So why this particular standard, the ANSI CSA IGSHPA standard? I'll give you a little bit of background on how we arrived here. I think everybody's familiar with the IGSHPA standards. The earliest publication date I could find was 1996. I know it was in the works before that. The current IGSHPA standards are 2017. They've been updated many, many times by the IGSHPA Standards Committee. Just incredible amount of talent on the Standards Committee. And in the latest edition, you can see here over in the corner, is still on the website. So why would we change? We've got standards that work for everybody. They've been updated on occasion, and they're pretty solid standards. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The first thing is, IGSHPA is not a standards development organization, and some examples are AHRI, ANSI, ASHRAE, ASME, ASTM, CSA, IAPMO, ICC, NSF, UL. A whole mouthful of acronyms here, but IGSHPA is not an SDO. Maybe someday we might consider that, but today we're not. And that didn't make as much difference in the past, simply because the industry was so small. We needed something to hang our hat on for consistency, so that people were looking at some sort of guideline as to what is a standard, what are the minimum requirements. But the way they're written, again, very useful information, but they're not really in standard language. So they're a little bit difficult to adopt if a local jurisdiction wanted to adopt the IGSHPA standards as code. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. In fact, the IGSHPA Standards Committee completed a report. It's a very thorough report, has a lot of excellent suggestions for updates to that bi-national standard, the ANSI CSA IGSHPA C448 standard. They published that report in 2019 and recommended that the IGSHPA standards be sunset in favor of C448 once these changes were made. So it's a really nice report that shows clause by clause, these are IGSHPA recommendations, and those need to be considered by the CSA committees so that we can sunset the standard. The IGSHPA Board of Directors did vote to sunset the 2017 standards once the next publication of the bi-national standard is available. So a little bit of history on what's going on with the standards. It's not that IGSHPA standards are bad. It's just that we want something that is usable in the future, and especially as we grow, we need something that's developed by an SDO and that can be written into code language much easier. So here's a little bit of history on the current standard, the 2016 version. Starting in 2014, CSA partnered with many different organizations to make sure it was binational. You know, it had already been a standard for quite some time in Canada by partnering with IGSHPA, NGWA, PPI, all the others listed here on this slide. There was a lot of changes to this 2016 edition. So you'll see verbiage in there that will say something to the effect of, you know, this particular standard in Canada or this standard in the US. So every clause is indicates both countries, and it makes for a, you know, really easy to use standard and something that it can be consistent. If you think about it, really an installation shouldn't be any different across North America. Obviously, the ground temperatures are different. There may be some local code requirements that are different, but the basic installation and design should be the same across North America. They're very, very similar from northern Canada to southern US. So what's our path forward? We've already taken a look. By we, I mean the CSA committees have reviewed the IGSHPA Standards Committee's report, and virtually all of the comments were incorporated. So where the IGSHPA Standards Committee had recommended changes to a particular clause that was discussed in all the various task forces, the language may have been updated just a bit, but the intent was incorporated into the standard. So now when the 2023 edition is published, the IGSHPA standards will be sunset because those comments have been incorporated into the next edition. So a little bit of history on C448. If you're Canadian, you know all about this, so I apologize for the review here, but again, for Americans, this may be new. It certainly was to me. What's interesting is this standard has been around for really a long time, 30 years. 1992 was the first edition of C445 for residential, and then following that, a couple of years later, C447 was the commercial institutional standard. So that's been in place for quite some time. In 2002 is when C448 was developed by combining 445 and 447. And that was continually updated through 2013 edition. In 2016, as I mentioned earlier, is when CSA partnered with these various US organizations to come up with the binational standard, the C448, that is an ANSI, CSA, and IGSHPA standard. So that was the first attempt. A lot of changes, a lot of hard work, and we'll talk about why we need another standard. In fact, 2016 was reaffirmed in 2021. So this 2023 standard is going to be the next edition. Also note that you know, the standard is part of the building code in Canada, and so that's kind of a given for Canadian installations. But in the US, we have sort of a patchwork. We could have different requirements in one state versus another, even to a county level, city level. So having this consistency is super helpful since it's not part of our building code. There are certain aspects of it that are in the code, but we need to make sure that we're all on the same page as an industry so that we have consistency of installation. Speaking of that, let's talk about the importance of a binational standard and you know, why it should matter to stakeholders. Let's first off define a standard. You know, this can be confusing when we talk about standards and codes and guidelines and everything else. But a standard is just simply a set of technical definitions and requirements for design, installation, manufacturing, testing, and certification, primarily to protect customers. In this case, you know, purchasers of ground source heat pump systems. So it gives us a minimum, you know, what needs to be done in order to have a good installation. It's developed by an SDO, Standards Development Organization. I read off those acronyms earlier. And so that's recognized by each of the countries' development organizations. It's typically based on a set of minimum requirements. So it's not a situation where it is a design manual, as I mentioned. These are the minimum requirements in order for that installation to be successful. Product manufacturers are responsible to determine which standards apply to their products and for the conformance to the standard. So that's part of the consensus process of developing a standard. Is we have a lot of stakeholders from all different aspects of the industry so that everyone's involved. We're not excluding anyone, and we're ensuring that the minimum standards meet what makes the most sense for a good installation. It's performance-based. That's really important. It's only prescriptive where necessary. For example, we don't like to see mechanical connections buried in the ground for a ground loop. So that's a prescriptive part of it. You can't use mechanical fittings in the ground. Performance-based is the outcome. What should the outcome be? And that way, we're not excluding the various types of technologies, the different components and so forth, as long as the performance, the outcome is the way it should be as defined in the standard. Doesn't matter how you get there. Prescriptive portions of the standard really are areas that you just can't, you don't have another choice. We wouldn't want to use PVC in the ground, for example. So it is performance-based as much as possible. Again, it's not a design manual. We have a lot of those discussions in the task force meetings where we start to get into all the intricate details, but that's not really the purpose of a standard. So hopefully that helps define what that standard is. How it's different from a code. A code really is a legally adopted document by the jurisdiction having authority. So they could adopt a standard, they could adopt model code language, they could adopt a portion of the standard, but it's something that's legally adopted and is used in the construction industry. Now, codes do refer to standards, and you'll see in local codes that it refers to C448, especially in Canada, as I mentioned. But even in the US, there are codes that refer to C448 for the piping requirements and antifreeze requirements and so forth. And so the code is going to specify the minimum requirements that protects the public health, safety, and welfare. And that's where codes and standards kind of meet to work together. They're only mandatory, though, if they're adopted as law by a regulatory body. So that local jurisdiction would adopt a particular standard or code language, and then that becomes the law. The authority having jurisdiction enforces the codes. So all this kind of ties in, but we have to have a consistent standard in order to have code language available. Now, to talk about C448 specifically as a standard, why is it important? Well, one of the biggest things here is the unified consistent requirements. Again, there's not a lot of difference throughout North America, so we should all have agreement on what makes a good installation and a good design. It minimizes and removes the differences. We really want to make sure that we're going to have successful installations, especially as the industry grows. It provides and simplifies referencing for regulators, which helps with enforcement, as I mentioned, if it is adopted by code officials. And it's great for practitioners. We have something to refer to. We've had a lot of questions. What should the minimum loop temperature be? Well, let's take a look at C448, and we have that information. Confidence, it's certainly a confidence builder. And we continue to update this standard. So each time there's an update, we're bringing in the latest technology, new piping materials, and so forth. And it's a resource. One of the great things about having a standard to refer to is when we develop new training, when we're doing personnel certification or whatever, there's a reference. There's something that we can reference when we're doing that training. And now we have consistency across borders. It's also accredited because it is developed by an SDO, a Standards Development Organization. It helps bring legitimacy to our industry. If we have a utility or a government, local entity that wants to see, what is our industry all about? Well, here's a standard that was developed by an SDO, and it has agreement with the industry stakeholders. So it helps us set that course. As we grow, we have something to work with, a performance-based standard. Now, this is purely my opinion, but there are some concerns if we don't have a universally accepted standard. And by universally accepted, I mean those in our industry are all pushing the same direction. I think that's very important, especially as we grow, because we could end up with documentation that might contradict other documents. It might even restrict installations. Some examples here, and we've already seen this to a certain extent, grouting requirements might be different from state to state. That's very difficult, especially as drillers travel from state to state. They may have different requirements. It can cause the prices to increase. It can cause lack of confidence from local officials, things like that. So we would like to have as much consistency as possible. It might even restrict the ability to put in vertical loops simply because of a lack of understanding. We've had questions about how vertical loops might affect groundwater temperatures, things like that. So we need something to hang our hat on that makes sure that we're all pushing the same direction, saying the same things. Terminology is a big deal. We've seen this with the term well or bore. A closed coupled ground source system uses bores. An open loop system or groundwater system uses wells. It sounds like it's semantics, but if you're looking at local code and there's a code for water wells, you really don't want that code to necessarily apply to ground loops. It might actually cause some problems with the installing contractor and the driller because of the simple terminology of well versus bore. So that's really important that we have a standard and we have a set of definitions that we can use so that we're not causing confusion out there. We could even see engineers specifying components that are not really designed for geothermal. So the standard just helps provide some sort of background as to, what about this, or how should we do this? And because it's a consensus-based standard, all the volunteers on those task forces have had these discussions over and over and over again, and some of them quite lengthy. So it's all good for our industry. These are some examples of some guidance that the standard can bring to us. This is the residential section. It defines what is the best approach for creating heat loss, heat gain calculations. And again, this is an example of the Bi-National Standard. In this example, it refers to ACA Manual J for the US and CSA F280 for Canada. So it shows both countries' requirements, and the language is essentially the same, but there may be a different way to go about that, which again is part of that performance-based approach for the standard. Same thing with equipment sizing. It provides US and Canada. There's guidelines on loop temperatures, antifreeze, concentration, on and on here. All of the basics that are important. I have to joke a little bit with my Canadian friends. The only difference here is the way flow centers are spelled, but we can live with that. It can be RE or ER. I don't really care. On the commercial side, there's a similar setup. There's a whole section on commercial, talks about designer expertise that's required, site survey requirements, ground loop sizing. This really concentrates on modeling and minimum requirements. So, for example, long-term temperatures, that modeling needs to take a look at a period over 10 years for verticals and 1 year for horizontals. Very powerful information. Piping material requirements, I mentioned that earlier. We don't want to put PVC in the ground, for example, but the interior piping can be different. So it specifies what's acceptable and what's not. Same with antifreeze and concentration, flushing, labeling of the piping and so forth, documentation that should be delivered to the end user or the building owner, testing, verification, and a big, very important part of this startup and commissioning. And it refers to other documents and standards. So it may talk about the ASHRAE startup and commissioning guidelines, which are super helpful. On the ground heat exchanger side, the sections are divided up into vertical, horizontal, surface water, and so on, including groundwater, open loop, standing column, so forth. So and DX systems. So all of those various types of ground loops then have their own sections with clauses that specify information about site survey, piping materials, and so forth. So you can see here, there's a lot of really good background information that can be used by designers, installing contractors, drillers, so forth. It does have a big impact on training. IGSHPA is in the process of updating all of our training programs, and this gives us something to use as a reference. It's an industry consensus standard, so our training is going to be more defensible. If somebody questions, well, why are you doing it this way? Well, this is part of the standard. This is the reason why the training talks about this particular item. And it's not just the trainer's experience. So it does give us the ability to have backup for that information in the training program. And terminology is so important. I mentioned earlier the well versus bore. Now we have definitions in the standard. We'll use those same definitions for the training, and everybody's speaking the same language virtually. Of course, we have two different languages in Canada. We have to be make sure that we're addressing, but at least from a technical standpoint, our terminology is consistent. In training materials, now we'll have references. So this reference, actually, this C448 standard is included with all of the IGSHPA training even today. We haven't completely finished all of our updates, so we're not referencing the standard in all of the training just yet. But we have an agreement with CSA so that we can provide that standard to members with our training programs, but also a discount to members who would like to have a copy of that standard. We have the ASHRAE ground source design manual used in our certified geoexchange designer course, CGD, the commercial training. So all of these become references now. Doesn't mean that we don't still need the IGSHPA manuals, like the grouting manual, for example, but now we have standards that are available and other resources that we can reference that are more industry-wide, which is helpful, I believe. IGSHPA's agreement with CSA allows us to use parts of the standard. I believe it's up to 20% of the standard we can use directly in training. So if we wanted to have a screenshot of a page from the standard, we could do that, which is really, really helpful. And eventually our manuals become smaller in size and easier to update. So instead of one large manual, we may have that broken up into smaller pieces. Our training and standards committees then can keep those up to date, and we have more usable material for IGSHPA members. Now on to the 2023 edition. These are some of the updates and the reason why we're going to a new edition. Not that there's anything wrong with the 2016 edition, but it does need to be updated as the industry changes. One of the biggest things at the top here is the IGSHPA Standards Committee recommendation. So in this case, the report that was created in 2019, that's incorporated into the next edition. So now we have consistency. We're able to sunset the IGSHPA standards and have a North American standard that everybody has a good feeling about. There is a new section in this 2023 edition on energy foundations. Some people call them energy piles. That's becoming more popular, and it really hasn't been addressed. So that's going to be exciting to see that new section. There's a new section on district geothermal systems. Again, in 2016, we didn't really have a lot of those happening. They were happening, but on a much smaller scale. Now it's really become a buzzword, especially in certain areas of North America. There's an annex that's being created on wastewater energy transfer. Some call this sewer waste heat recovery. That's a huge deal in our future for beneficial electrification and promoting geothermal, because we have all of this energy that can be used that's right now just going down the drain, literally. And so that's a really exciting update to the standard, having that particular technology included. We're also updating information on heat transfer fluids to include some of the newer types of antifreeze, all the latest piping materials. We have really good participation from stakeholders. PPI has a voice here, and that's really important that we have the latest piping materials, new language on thermal conductivity testing. So you can see, it wouldn't seem like there's a lot to add, but there's just so much changing in our industry that we have to keep this relevant. And the last thing here is we're removing some of the redundant material. When the 2017 edition was published, we added so much information and so many pages. Now we're going back and taking a look and removing some of that redundant language. If it appears in 2 or more sections, then we're moving it to the general section because it applies to all those different sections. That reduces our page count, which makes it easier to manage, and also less chance of having different sections that disagree just because we have repeated information. So that will make it easier for users to apply this standard, to take a look at all the different sections and language. As far as dates go, we tried to start in 2019, but we didn't have any funding. As you can imagine, a task like this is quite expensive. So we did get funding in late 2019, and then COVID hit, which delayed our start. So we ended up reaffirming the 2016 standard in 2021. That gave us a little more time for updates and get back on track. We've made just enormous progress. The volunteers on the task forces have been incredible, and it's a big commitment. It takes quite a bit of time, especially from the task force chairs. They have put in just countless hours to do these updates. Our goal is to have our edits finished in December of this year. That would allow us to go out for public review in February or March of next year and publication next fall. So we're still about a year off in publication, but everything is very close to being done, and we have incorporated a lot of really good changes and updates. Once that is published, then we'll be able to officially sunset the IGSHPA standards, the 2017 edition, and we'll be using one standard for everything, which should be super helpful. How can you get this standard? Well, the standard is available a number of different places. ANSI has it available, since it is an ANSI standard, for 155 US. You can go to CSA and buy it for 155 Canadian, or our agreement with CSA allows us to offer this for $100 US to IGSHPA members. It's only available in PDF with that arrangement, but it gives us another advantage to be an IGSHPA member. You can get that PDF copy of the standard at a discount. Just recently, this standard became available for free view access. So if you don't want to download a PDF, you can simply go to the IGSHPA website. It's IGSHPA.org/standards. You can see right here. And there are instructions on how to get the free view access. All you have to do is set up a free account at the CSA Communities website link, and you'll be able to view it online. You can't download it as a PDF unless you pay for it. But if you're looking to view the standard, it's now available at no cost. That's a recent change, and I think it's great to have that availability as a free access. All right, that was a whole lot of information in a short amount of time, but I wanted to make sure everybody was updated as to what's happening with the standard, what's happening with IGSHPA, with training, and all the fun acronyms. Any questions at all that you might have on where we're going with C448?
So we just have a couple comments in the chat. So Will Lang mentioned that having some copy-paste content from the standard and training would be a great idea to integrate, and Jeff touched on that wonderfully. Kevin Austin mentioned that the language can have a significant impact on permitting, example, well versus borehole. And we do see that being a challenge across the country, that especially as you're talking to these inspectors and municipal people and people who are really just not in touch with everything we do every day, it does help distinguish that as they're writing code. Kevin said, successful and consistent operational systems that work well. These work to enhance the reputation of the industry. That's what's really important. Having been a commissioning engineer, I agree with everything you are saying. I have known of several ground source heat pump systems that have failed in a big way and had to put some systems in life support. Systems testing, water treatment, use of technology to ensure consistent and long-lived operations, et cetera, are so important. That's
wow.
Really
how do we incorporate that into our spiel? I like it.
It couldn't be more true, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure all of us on the call have experience or stories, some good, some bad, about systems just like that. that it needed to have met the standard, they didn't, and then people bought problems for later. So it just screams the importance of this type of standard being relevant and available across the country and to the north. Do we have any other questions?
Well, I wasn't sure how many questions we had. You know, I'm pretty passionate about this, but it can be awfully boring to some people when you're talking about clauses and subclauses. So I can give you a little bit of a preview as to what that standard looks like while we're waiting for questions, if you like.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Very good. So this is the residential section right here. I thought I'd just kind of go through how this is set up. They have clauses and subclauses, as you can see here. What's really great about the way this is set up is it is performance based. So it talks about the designer being responsible here. It doesn't say, you know, what, it doesn't give a lot of details there. It's clearly putting the responsibility where it should be. So that's where a performance-based standard should work. These subclauses then talk about, you know, physical limitations of land area and so forth. You can see here there's information here about avoiding cavitation or airlocking of a pump. So the standard really does a nice job of providing the minimum requirements. This happens to be the residential section. There's similar information in the commercial section. And it even talks here about a commercial type system installed in a residential application. We always kind of wonder, well, is this commercial or is it residential? And so there's some guidance there. Talks about non-pressurized systems. This was not in the standard previous to 2016. And so now it's part of the standard, non-pressurized flow centers for residential systems. Talks about design algorithms for sizing heat exchangers, ground heat exchangers. So just a lot of good information in here. And I thought maybe it might be helpful to see how it's designed so you can know what to expect. It even shows minimum groundwater temperatures for residential applications based upon the mean ground temperature. So that is a direct correlation. We're not just guessing. If the ground temperature is colder or warmer, we would design that ground loop just a little bit differently. Talks here about submerged systems, groundwater design. There's a section on DX geothermal systems. So just a lot of really good information that I'll kind of scroll through here. Installation of systems. And again, all of this is through you know, our consensus discussions in the task forces. Once we come up with changes, we get consensus on those changes, and then that gets updated as necessary. Even maximum allowable support for piping and so forth. Do we have any other questions come in, Courtney, or has everybody had their fill?
So far, just comments. We did just get one that, so a lot of great info. Thank you for sharing. Did you have a chance to go via the licenses to operate requirements around the US in each state? There's really a big challenge in each state to understand which licenses you should receive and who is the key stakeholders. What advice would you provide to the team who is entering the states and looking to get licensed?
Well, that's a great question, and you and I have talked about that a lot, Courtney. That's definitely on our high priority list. That's really more of an IGSHPA task than a standard, but we are trying to build all that information. NGWA has some good resources as well, but there isn't really a good concise resource available that shows all of that licensing information. Courtney has done a great job of putting a bunch of it together. And one of our goals is to have that available on the website once we have a little bit more information that can help people who are just starting in business in that state. They know what they're going to deal with. Did you have any comments on that, Courtney? I know you've had a lot of involvement there.
I have, and to say it's inconsistent is probably being pretty generous. Every state is very, very different. There are some states that require you to be a licensed well driller. Some states have specific drilling requirements and a license for geothermal. Other states not only require you to be a licensed well driller, but you have to be a licensed mechanical contractor to even put pipe in the borehole. And then other states require you to be a licensed mechanical contractor to connect any of the vertical boards to the building. You not only have to be a licensed mechanical contractor, you may have to have a specialty classification. There is this, the best way to start in any state is probably to start with a local association to start asking questions. And frankly, most of what I have found is just Google. I know to start looking at mechanical contracting license requirements, and I know that I need to start looking at water well drilling requirements and what that state's version of a DEQ, DEP, Water Well Protection Agency, they all have different alphabet soup of acronyms, but those are the people to start with, because those are the people that are going to regulate the code and the requirements for how to put the systems in. But it really is pick a state, any state. And frankly, even some states are inconsistent because a county may be more restrictive than even the state is. So if you're looking at specific projects, not only would I look at the state that you're looking to work in, but the county in particular that you're looking to work in. For example, I know Pennsylvania, there's one county in Pennsylvania that's very restrictive, but none of the other counties are as restrictive as that. So again, I would just encourage you to Google. It's not a great answer, but as Jeff said, we are working to put together a database that would have all this information available at your fingertips that you could take a look at. We did get another question, Jeff. Does IGSHPA plan to collaborate in the future with ASHRAE on standard development?
Absolutely, yeah. We want to collaborate as much as possible with all of the organizations. In fact, we signed an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with PPI, Plastics Pipe Institute, earlier in the year, and we're looking to work with all of the complementary organizations as much as possible. So anytime we can work on those types of projects together is definitely an advantage. I'm trying to sit in on ASHRAE TC 6.8 as much as I can, and we're also involved in the IATMO committees. There's a new committee on ambient temperature loops that we're involved in. So yeah, that's, we'll take any suggestions from members. And we will also accept, volunteers for our committees. We would love to have more involvement in the organization so that we can get more of this type of stuff done. Yeah, great question.
Another question, is there any consideration of disseminating the standard to state regulators? Not sure if they are accustomed to paying for standards.
That's a really good question. I have really pushed CSA to do more PR, especially in the US, because as I mentioned earlier, it's part of the building code in Canada, so it's a given, but it's not in the US. And I think that's where IGSHPA, but also all of our members and other organizations that we work with can help spread the word. I talk to people every day that have never heard of this standard, unfortunately. And so if you have contacts to those local officials, we would be more than happy to send them links to the read-only version. We would answer questions. We've had a lot of those discussions already. I had a really interesting discussion with an electric co-op in Indiana. They didn't know how to determine what the minimum loop temperature should be. And of course, we have an easy answer for that. That's in the standard. And just making them aware of that was really, really helpful. It's not that they didn't trust the local contractors. It's just they didn't have any guidance. They didn't know what it should be. And so we are happy to work with anyone who might have contacts. If we could add them to the IGSHPA mailing list, that'd be great. If we need to reach out and send them links, we would love to do that.
Someone else has asked, any code in the US reference C448?
Yes, I think the ICC and the IRC references C448 for piping materials. We need to continue to work on that. IATMO does have model code out there that references C448. And so again, that's where we can use some help. If you're volunteering on any of those committees, then we would love to work with you and provide information so that we're all on the same page.
Lance did comment. PPI is excited about the recent MOU with IGSHPA, setting the basis for extended future collaboration. We're committed to supporting the ground source heat pump industry with support on piping information and data. And the sentiment is shared, Lance. We are so excited about the partnership with PPI. PPI is a great institution. And actually, Lance does a fantastic presentation on the difference between a code and a standard. So if anyone had had a chance to look at that or watch that, it's fantastic. But any other questions? Jeff, one question about the standard. So as people have asked or made comments, really we're referencing making sure that projects go in well and that an end client is happy. So a lot of that burden falls on the final commissioning steps, right? Where in the standard can people find information about commissioning requirements or final checks and balances we should be doing on these systems before we turn them over?
That's a really, really good question. And I didn't realize I wasn't sharing my my screen. You were still looking at the slides earlier when I was going through some of the standards information. Let me just kind of give you an example. We're already in the residential section. Hopefully you can see. Let me reshare here. Let's see. Are you able to see that, Courtney?
Yeah, it says submerged heat exchanger installation closed loop.
Yes, so there's actually a section here, or I should say a clause. Here's testing and verification. And then it talks about different loop types. There's flushing and charging. This is all kind of commissioning. In the commercial section, there's actually a whole section on commissioning. Let me see if I can find it. I'm already in residential. Startup and delivery. So this is along the lines of commissioning here, labeling, delivery documentation. So all that's spelled out. There's even a site survey and an as-built drawing. And so all that's part of the standard. I mean, commercial probably does a little bit better job showing that. Let me try to find that real quick. And these are all being updated as well.
Just as a side note, Lance did make the comment that the 2021 ICC IMC states piping valves fitting the connection shall be installed in accordance with the ANSI CSA IGSHPA C448, section 1210.8.
Thank you, Lance. Couldn't have said it better, that's for sure. So here's startup and delivery in commercial. This gives some ideas here on what needs to happen during that process before starting up, equipment, valves and controls, all this kind of stuff. And that's being expanded. What's been added to the 2023 edition is the ASHRAE procedure, which is very, very thorough, and I think will give us even better information.
Great, and I think, I mean, to other people's point, these standards right here, this section in particular is the one that finishes the project out, right? Makes sure that the client ultimately gets what they need and what they paid for. We did get another comment from 2016 update to 2023 version release. Is a long time frame for industrial changes. Do you think late 2023 release will be too late for any ongoing projects for efficiency, et cetera, if there are any foundational changes?
I don't think so. You know, the 2016 standard is pretty solid. You can't go wrong referring to 2016. What you're going to miss is, you know, if you have a project that has sewer waste heat recovery, it won't be in there. If you have, you know, a district system, it won't be in there till later. But, you know, it'll be out for public review in just a few months. So you will have a chance to see what's in there. But if you're referring to, let's say, the vertical section, that's really not going to change a lot. The only thing that was really changed there was some of the language that was redundant was moved to the general section. So, you know, there's really nothing wrong with the 2016 edition. It just happens that we have new developments on piping and antifreeze and different technologies. And so that I wish we had it yesterday, but, you know, one of the things that happens with this consensus process is that it takes a little while to make sure that everybody is comfortable with all the additions and the changes. And that can take, quite some time. Once that happens, then there's some time for public review, because again, we want to make sure everybody all the stakeholders are involved. Then that public review has time for responses to those who have expressed concerns or want changes, whatever. Then it goes to the editing staff at CSA. So I think we're on a pretty good track to have this by the end of next year. I'm hoping earlier than that, but in the meantime, the 2016 edition is pretty solid.
Great. We had another comment that we're delivering directionally inclined bore placement to reduce surface footprint, site impact remediation for urban areas. Is IGSHPA considering this alternative approach as it relates to its standard scope?
I guess in urban areas, maybe setbacks would be the concern there. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but there's been a lot of discussion on setbacks. If ground loops could be installed on the property line or distance from other buildings, so forth like that. That has been considered is in the works. Being that it's a performance-based standard, that's something that the authority having jurisdiction needs to look at, but also we're taking a look at all the language to make sure that we're not excluding applications. That's a pretty hot topic right now, and I think by December we'll have a really good feel for what setbacks should look like in urban areas, and it's going to be much less restrictive than the 2016 version.
So I'm guessing he's probably referring to the radial style drilling, where they're going to start from a center point and then radial out in a vertical position. So instead of it just being a vertical straight borehole, they drill at an angle so that it provides one point of connection, kind of like a directionally drilled system, but doing it deeper. Johnny, is that kind of the technology that you're talking about?
Yeah, do you mind if I chat for a second? I think my point is that as I look at the existing standards in C448 and such, it's just everything is referenced to vertical, horizontal bore placement, and that's the constant everyday reference. And in terms of industry based engagement, as it references a standard, it's kind of like, well, there are existing standards for vertical, horizontal. It could be as simple as the standards related to vertical bore placement are perfectly aligned and connected to the directional or inclined bore placement. There's no clear communication of that sort. It's not highly detailed, so it leaves questions, if you will, in terms of should an alternative standard approach apply here, et cetera. I'm certainly not voting for a different set of standards by any means, just the inclusion of that so it's readily referenceable in the existing standards.
Well, that's perfect timing, because we're just finishing up these edits. So we do have directional bore in horizontal, but that's not what you're talking about. So we've addressed horizontal bore, so to speak, but vertical, I'd have to look at what we have made, what changes we've made in the vertical section. If you'd send me an email, I'd be happy to get the chair of that task force involved, because it's not too late. Now's the time to make any of those comments. We still could make it during public review, but if we can do it now before we go out for public review, it's just perfect timing. My email address is jeff@igspa.org, so it's relatively easy to use.
One question was asked: how and when will the new standard be promoted for public view? And then a follow-up was, how often is the C448 updated?
Yeah, the standard is updated every 5 years unless it's reaffirmed. So if there aren't any changes, then it just gets reaffirmed. I have a feeling in our industry it's going to get updated every 5 years, because we have so much changes going on. It will be announced on the CSA communities page. So that's a good idea if you want to sign up for that view only standard, so that you have a CSA communities account. And it's also going to be announced through other press releases that CSA does through trade organizations and so forth. So we will try to include all that information in our mailings. I shouldn't say try, we will include all that information in our mailings. And so if you're not on the IGSHPA mailing list, let us know, send us an email at info@IGSHPA.org, info@IGSHPA.org. We'll get you on the IGSHPA mailing list, because you're going to want to have that information anyway about the conference and about other activities that IGSHPA is doing. But I think that's a really good point. We'll make sure that we also announce public review for the standard and those timelines.
Great. I don't see any other questions. Oh, as I said that, something else came up. As you know, the next version of the National Building Code and our other national codes in Canada will occur in 2025. Then we will have to wait until provinces and territories adopt it. Until the 2025 building code gets adopted, the 2020 National Building Code, where adopted, will be used, which means the 2013 series version of C448 will be used unless amendments are issued to adopt the 2023 version of C448. It sounds like jurisdictionally there'll be some challenges to make sure that we're using the most current version of C448 that we can.
It is a challenge. I think Ontario still uses 2013, if I remember right. And some conversations we've had along those lines. I'm by no means an expert on Canadian politics or government agencies or the acronyms associated with those, but I know there's been a lot of discussion about changing the verbiage to say the latest edition of standard XYZ versus, well, I guess it's Z in Canada, right? Versus having 2016 edition or whatever. So that is, I don't know where that's at in the various provinces as far as being adopted. I'm sure that, Lance or some of the others who are involved in this on a daily basis may have a better feel for that. But there definitely has been discussion about referencing the latest edition versus a particular year, so that helps make sure everybody is looking at the current information. All kinds of great questions here. I could talk about this all day, but we have 2 minutes, I guess.
We do. So let's wrap it up. I want to thank Jeff so much for doing this and giving this an update, and all his participation with CSA and IGSHPA for that matter. I'm a little selfish in that plug. But as we've talked about a lot of this today, we would still encourage anyone to join as a member if you're not already a member. You can contact info@IGSHPA.org to ask any questions about your membership or ask for to renew. We'd be happy to help you along with that process. And then make sure that you attend our conference in December. The early bird registration does expire the first part of November. So get in and register. We should have a lot of fun. It's in Las Vegas this year, just off the strip of the convention center. So should be amazing. And the lineup of speakers is even more incredible than it's been in the past. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. And thank you again, Jeff, for everything. And we will see everyone at the next town hall.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.